The grand ballroom shimmered under the glow of 1,000 crystal chandeliers. The air buzzed with soft chatter, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the occasional burst of laughter. It was a night of celebration, a wedding that had been the talk of the city for weeks. But no one, not even the bride herself, expected the kind of drama that was about to unfold. Seated at one of the elegantly decorated tables was a man who drew more eyes than the bride and groom combined. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored black tuxedo, his sharp features unreadable. This was Adrian Cole, self-made millionaire, respected entrepreneur, and once upon a time, the man who was supposed to be standing at that altar. Yet, he wasn't alone. Beside him, in a dress that left everyone whispering, was a woman no one recognized. She wasn't a socialite, a model, or an heiress. No, she was someone entirely unexpected. His maid, the very woman who cleaned his house, cooked his meals, and lived in the background of his luxurious world. And yet, here she was, sitting next to him like an equal, with a quiet confidence that made heads turn. The moment Adrian walked in with her, the energy in the room shifted. His ex-fiancée, standing at the far end of the hall in her pristine, white gown, froze mid-conversation. Her smile wavered for just a second before she forced it back into place. But the look in her eyes was unmistakable. Shock, confusion, and something else. As the night went on, the tension only grew. Eyes flicked back and forth between the newlyweds and the uninvited guest. Whispers spread like wildfire. Who was she? Why was she here? And most importantly, why did Adrian bring her to this, of all events? Then, just when the night seemed to settle, when the music played and guests lost themselves in laughter and dance, something happened. Something no one saw coming, and in that moment, everything changed. Adrian leaned back in his chair, swirling the golden liquid in his glass as he observed the scene before him. Conversations continued. Laughter rang out, but he knew, he could feel it. Every pair of eyes in the room kept darting toward him, and the woman by his side. He smirked slightly. Let them wonder. That was the whole point, wasn't it? Sophie, the woman sitting next to him, felt the weight of the stares too. She was used to being invisible, blending into the background of Adrian's mansion, a quiet presence who never overstepped her place. But tonight, she wasn't a maid. Tonight, she was his guest. Dressed in a deep emerald gown that hugged her figure in all the right places, with her hair softly curled over her shoulders, she looked nothing like the woman who spent her days scrubbing floors and organizing shelves, and that was exactly why people couldn't stop looking. Across the room, Isabella, the bride, Adrian's ex-fiancée, held onto her champagne flute a little too tightly. Her knuckles turned white, but she kept smiling, kept entertaining, as though Adrian's presence didn't bother her in the slightest. But deep down, a storm was brewing. She never expected him to show up. And even if he did, she certainly never expected him to bring her, a maid, of all people. Her husband Daniel, the man she had chosen over Adrian, noticed the change in her demeanor. He leaned in, whispering something in her ear, but she barely heard him. Her mind was elsewhere, trapped in the past, in the memories she had long tried to bury. The engagement, the breakup, the choice she had made. Adrian had been her perfect match on paper. Wealthy, successful, charming. But that was the problem, wasn't it? He was too perfect, too in control, too unreadable. And Daniel, he had been different, warmer, more open. He made her feel safe. So why then did seeing Adrian now, with another woman no less, make her stomach twist in ways she couldn't explain? She wasn't the only one feeling the tension. Sophie felt it too. She could sense the unspoken words, the curiosity, the disbelief radiating from the crowd. She knew what they were all thinking. Who was she to be here? Why would Adrian, a man with every option in the world, bring someone like her? She shifted uncomfortably, reaching for her glass to steady herself. But before she could take a sip, Adrian's voice cut through the noise. "Relax," he murmured. "Just for her. Let them look." His tone was calm, controlled, but Sophie wasn't fooled. She had worked for him long enough to know there was more beneath the surface. This wasn't just about showing up at Isabella's wedding. This was about something deeper, a game, a statement, maybe even revenge. And she was right. Adrian wasn't here just to witness Isabella's new life. He was here to remind her of what she lost, to make her question whether she had made the right choice. And Sophie, she was part of the plan. But what neither of them realized was that the night was far from over. As the evening progressed, Isabella's carefully maintained composure began to crack. It was in the way her laughter came too quickly, the way she kept stealing glances at Adrian, the way she hesitated before reaching for Daniel's hand. And Adrian saw it all. Then, the moment came. A slow song began to play, couples moving to the dance floor. Daniel extended his hand to Isabella, but for the briefest second, she hesitated, just enough for Adrian to notice. He turned to Sophie, his expression unreadable. "Dance with me." It wasn't a request. Sophie hesitated. She wasn't a dancer, wasn't used to this world, but something in Adrian's eyes made her nod. As he led her onto the dance floor, whispers erupted. Isabella watched, her lips parting slightly, her nails digging into her palm, and then, as Adrian twirled Sophie in his arms, holding her closer than necessary, Isabella did something no one expected. She left her husband's side and walked straight toward them. The night had only just begun. As Isabella stepped onto the dance floor, the crowd hushed. Even the music seemed to fade as all eyes followed her. Her gown trailed behind her, her expression unreadable, but there was fire in her eyes. Daniel called her name from behind, but she didn't stop. She kept walking, straight toward Adrian and Sophie. Sophie felt the shift before she even turned her head. The once graceful dance suddenly felt suffocating. "Adrian," she murmured, her grip tightening on his shoulder. But he didn't move away. If anything, he only held her closer, his jaw set in a firm line. And then Isabella stopped right in front of them. "May I cut in?" Her voice was smooth, controlled, but her eyes betrayed her. She wasn't just asking for a dance. She was asking for something more, for answers, for closure, maybe even for a second chance. Adrian tilted his head slightly, amusement flickering in his gaze. "I don't think my date would appreciate that." The words hung in the air like a challenge, a silent battle between past and present. Sophie felt out of place. She had known this night wasn't just about her, but standing between these two people, she suddenly felt like a pawn in a game she didn't understand. She stepped back slightly, but Adrian caught her wrist gently, keeping her by his side. Isabella's lips parted, but no words came out. For the first time that night, she didn't know what to say. Maybe she had expected Adrian to brush Sophie aside, to prove that this was all just a show. But the way he held on to her, the way he looked at her, told a different story. Daniel reached them then, placing a hand on Isabella's back. "Is everything all right?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a quiet warning. Isabella turned to him, and for the first time that night, she truly looked at her husband, at the man she had chosen. And in that moment, she realized something that shook her. To her core, she had made her choice long ago, and whether it was right or wrong didn't matter anymore. This wasn't her story with Adrian to rewrite. It never would be. She let out a soft breath and forced a smile. "Of course," she said, stepping back. "I was just congratulating them." Adrian didn't say anything, just watched her carefully. He knew her too well. He knew that wasn't the full truth. But he also knew that whatever she had been searching for tonight, whatever lingering question or regret she had held on to, was something she'd have to make peace with on her own. The music swelled again, the moment passing, as Isabella turned back to Daniel, linking her arm with his. The crowd, sensing the tension had broken, slowly returned to their conversations, their drinks, their laughter. Sophie let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That was something," she muttered, looking up at Adrian. He finally turned to her fully, his expression softening. "You did good," she let out a small laugh, shaking her head. "I didn't do anything," but Adrian knew better. He had brought her here as part of a plan, thinking this was about proving a point, about showing Isabella what she had lost. But somewhere along the way, something had changed. This night wasn't about the past anymore. It was about the future, and as he led Sophie back to their table, the realization settled in. He wasn't looking back anymore. He was finally moving forward, and this time, he wasn't alone.